Everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Now, we have not even unwrapped the new 12 team format for the college football playoff. And already, the powers that be are floating around the idea of more expansion. Now, we've seen multiple reports out there that there does seem to be some momentum generating towards a 14 team playoff. The 14 team playoff would then mean that the Big Ten and SEC, the heavyweights of college football, would each get three automatic qualifiers, while both the Big 12 and ACC would get two. The group of five would get one spot, while there would be three at large bids and a spot for Notre Dame. You could peel it back and, decipher it any way you want. But for me, at the end of the day, just like the current expansion that we're about to see, this is all about a money grab by the school presidents and their chancellors because we don't even know yet what the 12 team format is going to look like. And already, they're talking about expanding. And it's just mesmerizing from the standpoint because for years we had no playoff system whatsoever. There were, the individual bowls, certain conferences were locked into certain bowls. So, teams couldn't play each other, i.e., the Rose Bowl for many years with Big Ten and Pac 10, for an example. Then, we go to the BCS, then the 14 playoff. And now college football, in my opinion, is about to go off the rails in the pursuit of more money. And at the end of the day, you could just blame greed as well as a television network like ESPN is going to throw out the money and entice the powers that be that are quote unquote running college football, if you will, to go out there and try to expand this postseason format even more. Now, don't get me wrong. We knew that the expansion was not going to stop at 12. I totally get it. But at least let's see what the product of a 12 team playoff looks like first before we start to add more freight to this train. And in my opinion, a 12 team playoff is more than enough to determine a national champion, as you're now going to ask, some of these young men to go out there and play 16 games in order to win it all. Whereas just 25 years ago, it was at 11, maybe 12. So, we're watering down this product for television money. And I say this because expanding it even more is just going to continue to diminish those important games, i.e., the conference championship games, in December, as well as games late in the season. We've already seen expanded conferences that are not helping this aspect either. And you look at it, the SEC, before when we had the BCS, there were problems because, we saw LSU play Alabama in the national championship, albeit they were the two best teams that year. When the powers that be decided to expand to a 14 playoff, they knew and they talked about, okay, there might be a possibility of multiple SEC teams getting into the playoff. It happened a couple of times. And of course, the people who weren't affiliated with the SEC were not thrilled about it. They also weren't thrilled when they saw a group of five schools, Cincinnati at the time, get into the playoff a couple of years ago. And then, of course, the Notre Dame factor. These were things that were agreed about from before, and still people complained about it when it happened. So, it's going to be one of those where, like I've already said multiple times, this 12 team playoff is going to be dominated by the SEC and the Big Ten as far as how many bids they get. And what do you think is going to happen with a 14 team playoff? Because I guarantee you that somebody out there is going to beef that the conference like the ACC gets two automatic qualifiers, or the amount of teams that the SEC gets, because what happens if the SEC and the Big Ten, take up those other three slots for the at large bids? It's going to happen. But you look at it at the end of the day, this is what happens when you don't have any true leadership within your organization. And I've talked about this time and time again. I know This is like kind of separate from the NCAA, but still, this is all about the school chancellors and the school presidents, simply going out there and trying to get themselves more money. At some point, the NCAA is going to be pushed over the cliff because their lack of power continues to show. And it's one of those things that, just like conference expansion, playoff expansion is getting out of control as well. And the monster is only going to get bigger. You look at it like this: college football, plain and simple, they've sacrificed tradition in favor of money because you got an 18 team Big Ten that's set to debut this year, a 16 team SEC. You're going to have a 16 team Big 12. All right. You have a 16, 17 team ACC. My point being is this: you basically have two conferences in one. Okay. And I'm old enough to remember, the old Big Eight when everybody played each other every year. I'm old enough to remember the SEC is a 10-team league where you played 8 games and you rotated. The same thing for the Big Ten and the Pac-10. Okay, and now we're getting lost in the wash where you have teams that are in the same conference that won't see each other for like once every 4 years, and it's one of those where we're sacrificing so many big time rivalries in favor of it, and that rivalries are what made college football. Rivalries are what makes any sport out there in general. And it's one of those, again, getting back to this expansion. To me, going for the 14-team playoff without even seeing what the 12-team playoff format is going to look like, at least on the field, and get a feel of it, to me, that's one of those where, you know what, you've already ordered dessert at a restaurant before your appetizer and your main course, have come out. You don't even know if you're going to be full from both your appetizer and your main course yet, but already you're adding dessert to your meal. At least eat the appetizer. At least have your meal first, your entree, before you can even think about having dessert. Because a lot of people, you go to the restaurant, you eat, and guess what? The waiter or waitress comes around. Okay, would you like dessert? And your stomach is telling you no. And at this point right now, they've just pushed all of that aside because they're becoming gluttons and gluttons for the money. And I'll tell you like this: it's one of those for me that if you want to do a 12-team playoff, fine. Because honestly, I was one of those who felt that four teams was enough. Because at the end of the day, there's always going to be a team that's going to have a gripe to say, you know what, we should have been there. This past season was a little bit different with Florida State and Georgia, but I guarantee you, even if we had a 12-team playoff this past season and Florida State and Georgia had gotten in, somebody's going to complain. Somebody's going to complain about the playoff seeding. Somebody's going to complain about their bye. Somebody's going to complain about not getting in. Okay, you look at the NCAA men's and women's basketball tournament. I'm going to focus on the men's tournament right here. You have a scenario where you have more than 30 automatic qualifiers. You win your conference tournament, or if your conference doesn't have a postseason tournament, a la the Ivy League, pardon me, I take that back because the Ivy League does now have a four team tournament. But you win your conference tournament, all right, you get an automatic bid to the NCAA tournament. Everybody else is an at-large bid, and we know that typically, the bigger conferences tend to rule the roost. You think back to the old 16-team Big East Conference. I remember they became the first league to have 11 bids in the NCAA tournament. You look at the Big 12 right now; that's flirting with getting 9 bids this season. In a 12-team format, I guarantee you, like I've said before, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to run things. I don't think that it's fair for, it's one of those where the SEC and the Big Ten in this format would each get 3 automatic bids. Okay. But it's one of those where what happens if it's a down year for the ACC? Are you then telling me that they're going to get 2 teams just because? What if it's a down year for the Big 12? Are you going to tell me that they deserve two bids? And it's one of those where if that's the case, they're taking a bid away from somebody. All right. If you want to have one school from the group of five automatically get in, fine. I'm totally on board with that. If you want to say each of the Power Four conference champions gets in, I'm on board with that. All right. And then, of course, it comes down to seeding. And then you have, your seven at large bids. And I think everybody, regardless of conference, and of course, the Notre Dame factor as well, uh, should then, be able to vie for those last seven spots. If that's the way you want to do it, you have four on campus games, the top four teams get buys. Fine, let's rock and roll. But you got a scenario here where college football is looking at it like it's the NFL. And it's one of those where the difference in the NFL is, well, the owners basically wanted to expand the postseason. They expanded the regular season as well. But you know what? It's something, at least for the regular season, it was basically talked about and bargained with the players. You guys want more money. This is what you need to do. Now, some people are trying to get on board with the NILs. Some are not. But at the end of the day, you're throwing all this money around. You're definitely going to have to go out there and pay these young kids for their services. But like I said, at the end of the day, all this is a money grab, and it's getting out of control. It's one of those where, to me, over expanding playoffs, it's all about money, but in my opinion, it's also a waste of time because I think that you're watering down your product. I've talked about the play-in tournament in the NBA before. Not a fan of it. Why? Because you have 82 games to figure out who are your best eight teams from each conference, especially when every team in each conference plays each other four times a year. That's more than enough time to figure out who's deserving to get to the postseason. You got 162 games in baseball. The National Hockey League, they're good with eight teams coming out of both conferences. It's one of those with football, with the NFL. I could understand this expanding the postseason from 12 to 14 is due to the fact that you still don't even have half of the teams in your league that qualify. But at the end of the day, when it comes to college football, by early to mid November, we kind of have a feel of who's going to be, um, playoff worthy or championship team worthy. And it's one of those where, you know what, by taking it too far, you're going to diminish the importance of those conference championship games. The conference championship games this year were super important because, or this past season rather, if Alabama doesn't win that game, they're not going to the playoff. And because of Georgia losing that game, they didn't get to the playoff. So you see the magnitude right there of the SEC championship game. We knew that the winner of the Pac-12 championship game between Washington and Oregon was playoff bound, while the loser was not going to be. Okay, so again, the magnitude and the importance of it, and you're just, in my opinion, diminishing it. And I can't harp on this enough. This is all about greed. This is why we have seen, and we're going to continue to see schools leave certain conferences in favor of more bread. This is why the Pac 12 doesn't exist like we once knew it to be. The same thing for the Big East and so many others. All right. And it's getting out of control. Like I said before, it's only a matter of time before we get to a 20 team football conference. It's just a matter of whether it happens to the Big Ten or the SEC first. Both of them are going to sit back and say, no, we're content with where we're at right now. But I guarantee you, if a major player, a la a Florida State, is able to get out of the ACC, for an example, that's just going to push one of these conferences even closer to 20. But nonetheless, this is getting to the point where we got a runaway freight train on our hands. It's one of those where, you know what, there's nobody at the controls of this train. This train is barreling down the track at 50 miles an hour and it's picking up speed. And at some point, this locomotive is going to go off the tracks. But until then, the powers that be are going to try to ride the brakes on this bad boy until they fall off. So, folks, that's going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank all of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now you can check it out. Drop a line to be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So, once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I am signing off. And I'm saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.